Yeah, you okay? Have you admit? Are you allowing everyone in now?
It says you're still connecting to the server.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Dr. Shaini Bashir. I'm an oral pathologist, and today I hope to give you all an overview of various advanced laboratory diagnostic techniques. Now, just a minute. Now, if you all are wondering why you should be listening to this presentation, I can think of two reasons at least. One, with this ongoing pandemic, lab testing has taken a center stage now, and words like PCR, antigen testing, rapid antibody testing, these keep repeating. These words keep popping up. So as doctors and as healthcare workers, I think it would be good to refresh our knowledge of lab techniques and get acquainted with these techniques. Secondly, other than the pandemic, we keep reading clinical research papers. But at the heart of all clinical research papers, or most clinical researches, there is always a lab test. So if we have a good understanding of the lab test, we have a better understanding of the clinical research that is being done. So I guess these two reasons are sufficient to keep you listening to this. Okay. Now, moving to the presentation. Establishing a proper diagnosis is key to ensuring that patients receive the most effective treatment. Now, diagnosis starts from a clinical perspective. Depending on the signs and symptoms given by the patient, a clinical diagnosis is made, and based on that, lab tests and radiological tests are asked for. And today, we shall concentrate on the various lab tests. Now, coming to evolution of laboratory techniques. Traditionally, lab techniques have been based on mainly the morphological characteristics of the organisms, microorganisms, and the growth characteristics and biochemical reactions. Now, when I say morphological characteristics, we mean the physical characteristics. Like, for example, we classify organisms as microorganisms as cocci, bacilli, spirochetes, etc., based on their shape. Okay, and these are viewed under the microscope if they are microscopic particles. But if they are submicroscopic, we use electron microscopes. And next would be growth characteristics. Growth characteristics based on how the microorganisms grow on media, what media is used, which selective media they grow better on, the pattern that they show on the various media. So based on that, again, microbial identification is done. This is a tumor. This is a biopsy specimen. Biopsy specimens, again, they are classified based on the morphology of the cells and the staining characteristics. Now, finally, we have the biochemical reactions. Now, biochemical reactions are a battery of biochemical tests which can be done in order to pinpoint what the bacteria is. Okay. Now, the problem with this is in order to find out or pinpoint the organism, you have to do a host number of cells. You have to go down the flow chart in order to find out. You do all kinds of biochemical. We all have heard of catalase positive, catalase negative, oxidase positive, oxidase negative, beta hemolytic, alpha hemolytic, non-hemolytic. Okay, but this is a very cumbersome procedure, and if we have to pinpoint the organism, we have to do a lot of cells, which is time-consuming and very expensive also. So these are the basic tests we have. These are the traditional tests: morphological, growth, and biochemical reactions. These tests have a lot of flaws, but they are not redundant. They are still the mainstay of most labs. Okay. Now, like for example, we get biopsy specimens. Out of 100 biopsy specimens, 80% of it we just diagnose based on the morphology. A few might have to go for further tests and analysis. Okay. So the next breakthrough came with the advent of immunological tests. Immunological tests, or mostly they also call it serological tests. Okay. So this here is immunological test means if whenever any foreign pathogen or foreign body enters into our body, our body mounts an immune response. Okay, and the center of this immune response is the formation of antibodies. Now, antibodies go and bind specifically to antigens. Now, this is an HIV cell. This is an HIV. This is the structure of an HIV. HIV, here we have the central RNA and all the surface proteins. Now, our body recognizes most of these proteins as foreign. This is the center of immune response. And when it recognizes it as foreign, it mounts an immune response and secretes antibodies. Antibodies come and bind.
Dr. Sherry, I think we're having a slight background disturbance.
No, I think it is coming from somebody else. You need.
Okay. Please continue.
Okay. So this binding of antibody to antigen is very specific. And any test which is based on identifying either the antibody or the antigen is called as an immunological test. Okay. So that is it. Immunological test is antigen antibody test. You identify either the antigen or the antibody or the complex of antigen and antibody. These are all called as immunological tests. Now the next level would be molecular test. Molecular diagnostics is based on, okay, let me just tell you, this as I said is the structure of an HIV molecule. Now HIV virus, now if this is the structure, this is the RNA of the HIV virus, this is a part of the RNA. This is the RNA in a diagrammatic form. So this is a GAG gene, Pol gene, WIF gene, etc. So if we are directly going to identify the genes or the molecular sequence or the sequence on the RNA or DNA of an organism or cell, the study is called as molecular diagnosis. Okay. So these are the various levels of lab techniques that are in use. What are the various areas in which lab diagnosis is used? One, cancer. In malignancies, molecular techniques are used for the diagnosis to identify the basic cell which is involved. It is used for the treatment. The treatment mostly nowadays, before anti-cancer drugs used to be like more of generic thing, but now it is based on the particular protein or particular genes which are expressed by a cancer cell. They are identified and antivirals are given in order to combat those particular genes or proteins. Like for example, I can give you an example. Many tumor cells express EGFR gene, epidermal growth factor. So when you're giving an antiviral, you give an anti-EGFR treatment rather than giving a generic treatment. Then prognosis of cancers. Rather than subjecting a patient to a whole lot of radiological techniques, which was a norm earlier, nowadays what is done is with a simple blood test, you can find out whether any tumor markers are present in the blood of the patient, okay, to test for any relapse, etc. So that is a part molecular diagnostics plays in cancer. Now next, coming to infectious diseases. Infectious diseases, mostly molecular diagnostics and immunologic diagnosis is used to identify viruses, because viruses are extremely difficult to culture. Okay, you have to go into a cell line in order to culture the virus. So viral diseases now, or you have to use an electron microscopy, which is again very tedious procedure. So nowadays most of the viral infections that are diagnosed by molecular and immunologic techniques, HIV, hepatitis, even SARS-CoV-2, etc. Then coming to bacterial diagnosis. Bacteria, the mainstay of diagnosis now still remains traditional, but a few bacteria, like for example TB. Now the mycobacterium which is responsible for TB, it takes a long time to grow on culture. It takes weeks, days to weeks to give a growth. So TB is usually done using molecular techniques, especially in India where it is an endemic. TB is usually diagnosed using some immunological molecular technique. Then you can identify drug-resistant staph, etc. Genetic studies. Genetic studies is where you study the genes in a patient or in a population. Now that is useful to study. Now some cancers run in families. So if you belong to a family where cancers are running, like for example, an example I've given here is the BRCA gene. you can actually test the remaining family members for this particular gene. And if they test positive, the probability of the people or the person getting the cancer is like for 60 to 70% more than the normal population, and appropriate measures can be taken. In non-malignant conditions also, like cystic fibrosis, pharmacogenetic testing, like for example cytochrome P450 testing, etc. Finally, coming to forensics. In forensic pathology, molecular techniques are very important. They help in sex determination and also paternity testing, DNA testing. It is a very commonly used word. So, okay. Now,
Hello, Dr. Shani.
it is not going to the next slide. Okay, fine. Okay, let's see what are the common advantages of all the molecular immunology techniques. Okay, each technique has its own advantages, disadvantages, but let's commonly talk about the various advantages they give over traditional methods. One, rapid detection of pathogenic organisms. Now, usually our cultures, biochemical tests, etc., they give us results in days to weeks. Whereas when we talk about advanced techniques, they give us results, we're talking about minutes to hours. Okay. It is, as opposed to the days to weeks it takes to give a test by traditional methods. Now, detection of non-culturable agents. Now, there are many. One is the whole viruses. Second is the bacteria, which some bacteria are not culturable on the regular culture media, and such bacteria, such viruses can be diagnosed using their antigen antibody reactions, or is based on their DNA or RNA sequences. Discovery of new organism subtypes. Now, this again, HPV and all, it was not known before. I mean, the HPV virus was known for a long time, but the various subtypes of HPV from 1 to 3 to 16, 17, 32, all that has been possible. The identification of all that has been possible only with the advent of these advanced techniques. And it is also important because see, some HPVs, just the presence of the HPV doesn't signify much. Whereas if you can show that certain strains of the HPV like 16, 18, etc. are present, it shows that they are more aggressive and they have more potential to cause malignant transformation of the cells. Okay? So discovery of new subtypes of organisms. And it was always said that the traditional methods are the gold standard by which all the newer techniques are measured. But now these tests have started to show increased specificity and sensitivity over the traditional techniques. Now, just to refresh what sensitivity specificity is. Sensitivity is the actual positives, or it is called as a true positive rate. And specificity is the ability of a test to diagnose actual negatives, or it is a true negative rate. In more simpler terms, sensitivity is the ability of a ability of a test to pick up, to show positive result. Okay, if you have a test which is highly sensitive, it shows that the disease, the test has picked up most or all of the positive cases. So if you test negative with a sensitivity test, a highly sensitive test, you can be like almost sure that you do not have the disease. Okay. So in short, a highly sensitive test picks up most of the positives, or most of the positive tests. So if you test negative with a highly sensitive test, it is, you can be sure that you are like free of the disease. Specificity, on the other hand, is, as the name suggests, these tests are very specific for a particular reaction. So if you test positive, chances are that you have the disease. Whereas if you test negative, it is like specificity. High specificity means chances are that you actually have the disease if you test positive. Okay. Now, next is automation. Now, most of these assays are highly automated. You have different machines, ELISA machine, PCR machine, all these are automated, and so it increases the workload and also increases the number of operators required in the lab. And next very important thing is only small sample volumes are required in order to do most of these tests. So these are the various advantages these advanced techniques give over the traditional methods. Now, methods, I will be talking about all these molecular methods and all these immunologic methods. Just to reiterate, molecular methods, we are directly going and analyzing the DNA or RNA of the organism or the cells. Whereas in immunologic methods, we are going to assess either the antigen or the antibody or the antigen-antibody complex that is formed in the body. Now, this again is a SARS-CoV-2, SARS-CoV-2, this is the virus, the COVID virus. And if you are again assessing the proteins, which are the proteins on the surface or proteins in the capsid, it is called as it is an immunologic test, whereas this is the genetic makeup of the SARS-CoV-2. So if we are testing either the ORF1A, E gene and N gene, these are the genes that are generally tested in the PCR test. Now, what is the principle or the fundamentals of molecular techniques? Now we are breaking it into molecular and immunologic techniques. Okay. Now, molecular techniques is when we are testing either the DNA or the RNA or the proteins which are produced by translation of the RNA. Okay. So it is from gene to RNA, it is called as transcription. Just remember that because we'll be coming back to that later. And RNA to proteins is called as translation. So testing any of these is generally called as molecular tests. Now, this is a basic structure of the DNA and RNA. The DNA is a double helical structure and it has a phosphate sugar backbone to which all the nucleic acids are attached. Okay. If it is a DNA, this strand is always complementary to this strand. And this is an RNA where RNAs are single stranded. DNA is called D. The D stands for deoxyribose, which is the sugar part, and RNA is a ribose sugar. Now, this is another view of the DNA. Now, in the DNA, this is a backbone of the sugar and phosphate, and these are the nucleic acid bases. So, the 4 important nucleic acid bases you have in DNA are adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. So, adenine always binds to thymine by a double bond, and cytosine always binds to guanine by a double bond. By a triple bond. So, this base pairing is very specific. Adenine will never bind to anything else, and guanine will not bind to thymine. In RNA, it is different. Instead of thymine, you have uracil. That is the only difference. So this binding or this complementary base pair binding is the basis of all molecular tests. Okay, and hence these tests are otherwise more aptly called as nucleic acid tests. Okay, so what is happening here is we have this is a double strand one. When we have only one strand, a complementary strand will come and bind to the single strand here. So this base pairing forms the basis of molecular techniques, and hence they also called as nucleic acid tests. Now, let me just tell you what a probe is, or a DNA probe. We all would have heard of DNA probe. Now, this is the target DNA or the DNA from the patient or from the tumor sample. Now, to this DNA, we want to test this part. Okay, we are going to test this part, this DNA, this sequence of DNA, this sequence of nucleotides we are going to test. So, in order to test that, externally from outside, we are going to add a base pair sequence which is complementary to the sequence. Okay, so this we add a probe, and this sequence of nucleotides is what is called as a probe. So a probe refers to a stretch of nucleotides about 100 to 1000 base pairs long that is used to detect a specific region of the DNA or RNA that is complementary to it. Okay, so a probe is what we add externally. This is the test DNA or the target DNA. Now, when we put in an external probe and it is able to detect a complementary base pair, it will go and bind. If it does not, it will not go and bind. If it binds, we have to know that it has bound. Okay, this is not something we are going to see with our naked eye. So we need So we need a detector molecule to be attached to the probe. So all probes come with one kind of the other of detector molecule. Now the detection system can be either a radioactive molecule or else it can be a radioactive molecule, in which case we have to use a autoradiography. Now this is not, this was a first way in which probes were used, and probes were, in which nucleic acid tests were done. But now it is not very popular because radioactivity is an issue, and we have to use a radioactive, radiograph, autoradiograph in order to see it. So this method is no longer used frequently. Now this, else you can attach an enzyme label probe. Okay, when you attach an enzyme, what you get is a color reaction or a chromogenic detection, or else finally you can have a fluorescent probe. If it is a fluorescent probe, you get the fluorescence. Okay, so is it clear as to what a probe is? A probe is just a stretch of nucleotides. Now when we put it from outside to the test sample, if it goes and binds, it shows a reaction, either a color reaction or a fluorescence reaction or a radiographic reaction. So now we know that the two basic components of the test are the DNA, RNA or protein, and the genetic probe. Now we'll go to the various techniques, a little in detail of the various techniques. The first of the molecular techniques to be found out was a blotting technique. In order to do a blotting technique, most of the molecular techniques, in fact, any sample, any pathologic material is suitable, be it a swab or be it a biopsy specimen or a blood specimen, a urine specimen, a CSF, saliva, any specimen in which you can get even a minute quantity of DNA or RNA is sufficient to do the molecular test. The first step, once you get the sample, would be to lyse the cell, because the DNA and RNA is usually inside the nucleus, okay, or else in the case of bacteria, it is within the cytoplasm. So first thing you would do is lyse the cell, then remove all the cellular components other than the RNA or DNA. So you remove the lipoprotein group, you remove the proteins, enzymes, everything else is removed except for the RNA. And the RNA is finally brought into solution. Purified RNA is either stored or used for the test. Now the DNA or the RNA that we get here is usually still high molecular weight. Okay, it is still, we usually cut it into small fragments for blotting technique. Okay, I'm talking about blotting technique now. We usually cut it into small fragments here. And then the next step would be, now you put it in an agar gel, a regular agar gel. You put it in an agar gel and electrophorese it. You run it, you pass an electric current from negative to positive. Most of the DNA fragments will move to different levels. Now the higher molecular ones will not be able to move fast, and so they will be more towards a negative, whereas the lower molecular weight ones will move much further away. So you get the agar in which the different proteins are, the different DNA fragments are present in bands now. Okay, you get a gradation of the various DNA fragments. Now, since, as I said, this is an agar, we now have to transfer it to a membrane. Now, agar is not very suitable for testing. It is a semi-solid kind of thing, so it is not very suitable for testing. So, in order to do the testing, we usually transfer it to a insoluble membrane like nitrocellulose or nylon. Now, this is done in blotting techniques by keeping blotting papers on top of it. When you have the agar gel, you have the nitrocellulose membrane, and lots of blotting papers are kept on top of it. Now, due to the capillary action, all the DNA fragments move upwards and they get fixed to the nitrocellulose membrane. Okay. Now, here it is insoluble, it is fixed, and all the proteins are immobilized in this cellulose membrane now. Okay. Now, to this we add our probe of interest, whatever we want to probe. Now, when we put our probe of interest, this probe can, when we put our probe of interest or the DNA sequence of interest, if the complementary part is present or the complementary DNA pair is present, the probe will go and bind. If it binds to any of the DNA fragments, it will show up in either the autoradiograph or the fluorogram, or it shows as a color reaction. So this is a basic principle of blotting techniques. All blotting techniques, clinical, just to tell you about a clinical situation, in a if a sickle cell anemia, in a sickle cell anemia, if a patient is suspected of having sickle cell anemia, what we do is the patient's DNA, blood sample, a patient's DNA is blotted with a probe and the with the known sequence of the mutated beta globulin gene. So if it is present, it will go and bind and you get the color coding. Now it is called as southern blotting when you test DNA. This was the first test to be invented or discovered. And then if it is RNA, it is called as northern blot. If it is protein, it is called as western blot. Now, western blot, most of us would have heard in HIV testing. Okay, western blot, we're testing proteins. But then since blotting technique is used, it is generally comes under molecular testing. Okay, in southern blot it is DNA hybridization, northern it is RNA DNA, and western blot it is antigen antibody. I'm not going much into the applications because see, the problem with blotting is blotting was available for a long time. Yet in spite of that, it did not become very popular as a clinical. It was used for research purposes, but never it became popular for clinical testing. It did not find much clinical applications. The problem with blotting is that it cannot. You need a lot. I mean, you need comparatively, you need a lot of DNA or RNA in the sample to be picked up by the blot. Like for example, the pickup is said to be you need an RNA 1 in 200 host cells, 1 DNA or RNA in 200 host cells. The blotting technique can pick up. But with the advent of amplification techniques, the prototype of which is RPCR. Okay. With the advent of amplification techniques, PCR was a game changer. What it did was, with PCR, you don't need high DNA or RNA load, because in PCR this DNA is amplified, and so it can pick up like 1 in 50,000 host cells. One DNA fragment in 50,000 host cells can be picked up by a PCR reaction. So with the advent of PCR, it became routine. It started becoming a routine lab procedure to identify microorganisms and tumor cells based on PCR. Now, of latest, a lot of non-PCR techniques have come up, but they are mostly research purpose. Okay. The polymerase chain reaction, it is also called as molecular photocopying. Photocopying, that is because from one single DNA, you can make millions and billions of copies of that particular DNA segment. Okay, and then when you put a probe, the probe easily easily goes and binds to the DNA of interest. So that is why PCR is so popular. It is because it amplifies. It is a technique used to amplify or copy small segments of DNA, and it generates sufficient amount of DNA in a sample in order to do genetic and molecular testing. Same procedure. You get the cell, you extract the DNA, and another thing is PCR used to be cumbersome because PCR had to be done manually. A lot of steps had to be done manually. But now PCR is like almost fully automated. Once you get the DNA is extracted along with the lysis buffer, everything, you put it into the PCR machine. Inside the PCR machine, amplification happens, and you can put the probe. Everything probe is also put inside the PCR machine only, and you get the result. The only thing you have to do is extract the DNA, put it into the PCR machine with the necessary reagents, and you get the result. And result is also mostly automated now, and it is quantitative as well as qualitative. Okay, so. Okay, going into the technique, this is the double-stranded DNA. Okay. Now the PCR machine is basically a thermocycler. It goes from one temperature to the next, and it goes from high temperature to low temperature, again to high temperature, and in each of these temperatures, a particular step of the PCR happens. Now, first at 94 degrees centigrade, denaturation or separation of the DNA fragments into two single strands happen. Okay, and then In the next thing, you add a primer. Primer is a starting nucleotide base kind. It will be just a few base pairs long. This is called as an annealing. The primer goes and binds. And next step is extension. Based on the primer, all the base pairs come and bind to the DNA. So now you have two DNA fragments, two DNA segments. From one DNA segment, you got two DNA segments. This PCR exponentially copies DNA. After one cycle, thermal cycle, you get 2 DNA copies. After the next, you get 4. After then again, you get 8. So with about 32 cycles, you get 100% efficiency. That is, you get at least 1 billion copies of the target DNA region. You're not encoding for the whole DNA. You're just encoding for the target DNA. So the entire DNA and the target DNA gets amplified by 1 billion times. Okay. Now this is a PCR machine, and these are the vials in which different. And another advantage of PCR is you can run multiple tests in one cycle. Okay, this is an advantage, but you can also say it is a disadvantage because usually labs will wait for a few number of samples, the minimum number of samples to come before they run a test. So although PCR takes only about for one test it takes like a few hours, 4 to 6 hours is sufficient. But generally labs wait longer in order to get more samples and run them all together in one cycle. Okay. PCR is a bit expensive. Now this is what happens inside. You have the everything, and then you have a this is a fluorescent probe has been attached, excitation, everything. Then you have a CCD camera, into which all the data goes, and it comes out as digital data for us. So it is very easy. Digital data, the present. I mean, other than qualitative, it also gives a quantitative analysis of the viral. I mean, whatever load it is. These are the various modifications of PCR. Of these, I will be talking about only 2 or 3, which is of significance in COVID times. Now, reverse transcription PCR. Now, when we saw the PCR test, we saw that it is based on, the starting point is always the DNA. Okay. Now, in reverse transcription, now we have many circumstances when the virus to be tested is a single-stranded RNA. Okay. In that case, or when we want to assess the gene expression. By gene expression assessment, we mean we don't want to know the DNA, we want to know the messenger RNA. Okay. When we want to study either the messenger RNA or a single-stranded RNA virus, what you do is you put the initial RNA fragment and then by an enzyme. Okay. From DNA to RNA, I told you it is transcription. So from RNA, when you are making a DNA copy, it is called as reverse transcription. All right. So what we do is using a primer, we put and reverse transcription enzyme. We create a complementary DNA strand, and then the regular PCR. Okay. The DNA denatures and then amplifies, and you get the DNA. So this amplifies DNA from RNA. RNA is usually two sources. One, viral RNA. Second is when we want to study the mRNA in a DNA organism or human beings also. Reverse transcriptase is the enzyme used. The next is real-time PCR. Real-time PCR means, as I told you, PCR runs in cycles. Okay, after every cycle, the number of copy increases. So usually, a regular PCR will give you the result at the end. Okay, there will be generally a threshold level. If it crosses the threshold level, it will give you the result at the end. But in a real-time or quantitative PCR, what happens is after every cycle, after one cycle, if there is a positive signal, it gives out the signal. And after the next cycle, again, if there is a positive signal and an increased positive signal, it gives the quantity of the increased signal. Then third cycle again, same thing. So this repeats. Now, usually based on when the first positive signal comes, whether it is after 5 cycles or whether it is after 6 cycles or after 10 cycles, we can quantify the RNA or DNA content in the sample. Okay. So here detection is in real-time PCR. While the reaction is occurring, after every cycle, data is collected and signal and we can know whether a positive signal is present or not. Whereas in a traditional, it is usually at the end, and only at the entire PCR cycle of 20 to 40 cycles run, we can get to know whether it is positive or not. Now this is what. This is just a clinical. This is just comparing two DNA samples. This is a control. Now, when you have this is a threshold line. Now this blue one, this sample, it started it crossed the threshold level after like 10, I mean close to 20 cycles. By then it crossed the threshold level, and so this has higher viral DNA or higher DNA content. On the other hand, this sample, the green sample started showing a positivity only after some 30 cycles. So the concentration of DNA in the sample is much lower as compared to blue sample. The green sample, the quantification is much less. Now coming to multiplex PCR. Multiplex PCR. Now here what happens is we want to test different aspect or different parts of a gene. We put primers for different parts, and different segments of the gene are assessed together. Like for example, this is set A, this is primer set B, the third primer, fourth primer. So, so a lot of segments of the DNA are tested at one go. Okay, and this is called as a multiplex PCR. Amplification of many targets. Now, a combination of all this is usually used for, or is what is used for SARS-CoV-2 testing. That is our COVID virus. Okay. The most of the time RT-PCR, so definitely the reverse transcription PCR, so definitely it is done. Real-time PCR and more advanced labs it is done. But as far as I know, most of the labs in India are not doing real-time PCR. When you with RT-PCR only, you get a positive or negative result. Okay, that is sufficient. But real-time will give the viral load also. And multiplex PCR is used because, see, coronavirus or the COVID, SARS-CoV-2 virus is a highly mutating virus. So if you use only one gene or one genetic sequence, if the virus mutates and it is not present in that virus or in that viral RNA, we get a negative result. So to avoid that, 2-3 areas of the gene are, or 2-3 conserved areas of the RNA are tested. Okay, when you do that, the chances of getting the false negative is much lower. Okay, so a reverse transcription, real-time PCR, and a multiplex PCR all combined together is what is used for SARS-CoV-2 testing. Now, the advantages of PCR. The first and foremost advantage is you need very small quantity of start DNA. As I said, one DNA fragment or one DNA or RNA fragment in 50,000 host cells. Even that a PCR test can pick up. Second thing is it is automated. Third, rapid results. As I said, results you get within hours, 2 to 4 hours, 4 to 6 hours, the results come out. Third, it is contained. Contained as in after you put it into the PCR machine, the chances of the viral contamination is less. Okay, then it is a highly sensitive and specific test, and you do not need an intact DNA or RNA. This is an advantage as well as a disadvantage. Using PCR, you cannot know whether you can just pick up viral particles which are although the virus has already died. Okay, although the virus is no longer present, some viral particles, if it is present also, this PCR reaction can show a positive test. Now the disadvantages, we are amplifying, and errors during amplification is common. So this based on what the PCR is testing, how long the nucleotide sequence that you're testing, the shorter the nucleotide sequence, the error, lesser the error. But the longer the nucleotide sequence and more genes that you're testing with PCR, more the chances of error. And it is expensive. It is an expensive test as compared to our regular other lab tests. It is an expensive test. Now, then another thing is target sequence needs to be known. Like even for the SARS-CoV-2 virus, you have to first identify which part of the COVID virus you are going to test for. So you need to know the target. If it is a novel virus, if it is a new virus, PCR cannot be the first test that you do for the novel virus. You have to do a gene sequencing test, and you have to find out what the genes or what the nucleotide sequences in that particular RNA or DNA is, and you have to create the probes for that, and only then can you use PCR as an application. Finally, contamination. This is more so with RNA because RNases are and RNA is like ubiquitous, everywhere it is present. So the test sample can get easily contaminated with extraneous RNA or DNA. So it needs to be done in a very sterile environment. Coming to some of the applications of PCR, as we all know, now we know that PCR is used for microbiology. It is used for viruses. Now it has always hepatitis, HIV, SARS-CoV. Most viruses are nowadays detected by either PCR test or by one of the immunological tests. Okay. If most of the Western countries, it's simple. Most of the Western countries they do a PCR test or one of the amplification molecular techniques, and if that is not feasible, we go for the immunological test. Bacteria, on the other hand, bacteria even now bacterial testing it is done in most labs based on culture and biochemical tests only, except for a few bacteria, like for example the TB bacteria, I think as I said before, it takes a long time to culture, and the sensitive, and here with PCR it shows immediate results and the sensitivity specificity is very good. And another thing is TB is endemic in India, so most government hospitals, most government labs, they have, wherever they have PCR, the TB probe is definitely present. Okay. Then epidemics, again epidemics, it has a major role to play in epidemics in identifying the organism containing it. Test treat. Okay. Next is forensic pathology. Forensic pathology, as I said again, in mass casualty cases and all, where the bodies are totally mutated, and also in sometimes in fetal, sometimes feticide, when you want to identify the sex or the gender of the person, you can use PCR technique. You basically what you do is you scrape a little bit of the buccal, I mean anything, and then you test for the Y chromosome or segment of the Y chromosome. If it is present, identified as a male, and if it is not present, identified as a female. And disputed paternity cases. Disputed paternity cases, it gives very good results. Like this is just an example here. Now, this is a DNA of the mother, and this is the DNA fragments or the electrophorus DNA fragments of the child, and 3 suspected fathers here. Okay. Now we have to, if we have to narrow it down, we see the child will have inherited DNA, it will have inherited chromosomes from both the mother and the father. So it will have nucleotide sequences corresponding to the mother and father. Not everything would have been inherited. So some of them will be corresponding to the mother. Okay. Based on this, can anybody make a guess as to which is the father? Any guesses here? Okay. Now here you see this. This is most probably the father, because you see more number of fragments matching here. Okay. So using this test, you can identify that. You can identify the. You can use this in disputed paternity cases. This is just an example here. Next, you can use it in genetics. Again, as I said before, it can be used in chromosomal disorders, hereditary diseases like inherited cancer syndrome, cystic fibrosis, etc. Finally, tumors, again, as I told you before, PCR can be used in order to identify the various genes which are expressed by tumor cells. Okay, which are expressed by tumor cells. Now, PCR in oral diseases. How far is PCR used by dentists and in oral diseases? Mainly, it is all in research level. Okay, I mean, most of the time you don't do PCR tests in order to identify what the periodontal disease pathogens are, except in a research level. But in some places, it seems, especially in Western literature, you can find that PCR is being done to identify the exact pathogen causing or the exact set of pathogens causing the periodontal disease in that particular person, so that appropriate therapy can be given. And with PCR, it has been found that, now it was always thought that periodontal disease is basically caused by bacteria alone, but now with PCR testing, it has been found that some viruses are also involved in periodontal lesions. Now this is a cytomegalovirus and this is a Epstein-Barr virus. They have shown to have a strong correlation with subgingival plaque and calculus areas. Coming to bacteria and periodontal, again PCR tests can 3 times more frequently show the presence of P. gingivalis as compared to traditional culture methods. Again, another aspect in periodontal diseases, the presence of AA combatans has been shown to be almost 70% present in people with periodontal disease as opposed to people without periodontal, or as opposed to 19% in people without periodontal disease. So these are some of the applications in periodontal diseases. In endodontics, what PCR has contributed to is a lot of organisms which were not thought to be present with conventional culture techniques. Like for example, T. denticola, Dialister, Pneumophilus epilifer, all these bacteria. They were not thought. I mean, they were found out to be present in root canals only with the advent of molecular techniques like PCR. Now coming to oral malignancies. Oral malignancies, that is oral squamous cell carcinoma, one of the most commonly mutated gene is a tumor suppressor gene P53. Now whether these are and also other oncogenes, tumor suppressor genes, their presence or their expression or not can be assessed using PCR techniques. And again, rhabdomyosarcoma, presence of translocations, etc., can be found out. Basically, in molecular, as in every other tumors in the body, in oral malignancies also, PCR tests can be used in order to find out whether a particular gene is expressed or not. Okay. Whether it is overexpressed, underexpressed, etc. Now, coming to the next technique, or in situ hybridization. In situ hybridization is in situ, as the word meaning says. It means identifying the DNA or RNA in its natural topographic location. Okay. Now, what we saw in blotting techniques and in PCR was that we are extracting the DNA out and we are putting it into a solution and then we're putting it into the machine. Okay. But here, so we don't know where exactly that particular probe is going and binding, or where exactly in the tissue that nucleotide sequence is present. In order to find out that, we have to use an in situ hybridization. So this can examine the DNA and RNA in its normal topographic surroundings. Only thing is, it is kind of, I mean, you're not like in PCR techniques and all, we are like totally lysing the DNA, I mean, totally lysing the cell wall and cell membrane, the nuclear membrane, everything. We are discarding the cytoplasm, everything is being done, and we are extracting the pure DNA or RNA. Here, what happens is everything is kept intact. The tissue architecture is kept intact, but on top of that, we have to mask the necessary nucleotide sequence, okay, which is done with a lot of stuff like proteinase, etc. Now, again, for in situ hybridization, you can either use a chromogenic label, in which case it is called as chromogenic in situ hybridization, or else you can use the fluorescent label. It is called as FISH. The FISH technique is very popular. Same basic principle as in southern blotting, northern blotting, and as in PCR. You have the target. I mean, you have the patient DNA or RNA, or the organism's DNA RNA, and we are adding a probe. Now, the probe, if it is complementary, it will go and bind, and depending on what label. In fluorescent, it is a fluorescent label, whereas in chromogenic, it is a chromogenic label. Now, the in situ hybridization became very popular because now pathologists and microbiologists for long, they have been used. I mean, we have been used to tissue architectures. So we understand better when the tissue architecture is preserved. So it came to be easily accepted by pathologists because the tissue architecture is still maintained. Now, this, for example, it is a lung section from an autopsied COVID patient. Sorry. It is a lung section from an autopsy COVID patient. Now here we see that the lung architecture is effaced. Okay. Now we suspect the presence of SARS-CoV-2 virus in this, and for that, in this tissue, we are going to do the in situ hybridization. So the probe will go and bind to the nucleotide sequence on the DNA, I mean, on the RNA of the virus which is present in this tissue. So here, I don't know whether it is clear. Can you make out the brown pinpoint marks here? Now, these are all, wherever it has shown the brown markings, it is the chromogenic in situ hybridization. Okay, in all these places you have the COVID virus. Okay, everywhere, all these small dots that you see here. So it is localized. You can see that you can see where exactly the virus is localized in the lung tissue. Now this is something else. Now here this is a fluorescent in the same tissue. Fluorescent in situ hybridization was done. So in that you just see the fluorescence being given out. Okay. Now this is a clinical application in case of an oral squamous cell carcinoma. Now, fish technique is very, the fish technique is very important, or it has gained it is very popular in order to identify chromosome aberrations. Now, chromosome aberrations within the chromosome, you're not going to what lies the chromosome and make it into strands. On the chromosome, where exactly the sequence is, you go and put a probe. I mean, you put a probe, and exactly where the gene of interest is, the probe will go and bind to it. Like for example, now this is a case where cyclin D1 gene, it is a cell regulator gene. Cyclin D1 gene is frequently altered in oral squamous cell carcinoma. Okay, so now you're going to put two probes. One shows the other red probes will red signals will show the presence of normal. Cyclin D1 is normally also present in a genome. So the red signal, this is a normal tissue. Okay, this is a normal chromosome. So the cyclin D1 gene is present in normal tissue in 2 copies, and this green probe is the probe for that particular chromosome. It goes and binds to the centromere of the chromosome. So in a normal tissue, you will get 2 red signals suggesting the presence of 2 cyclin DNA genes, and 2 green signals which shows that it is chromosome 11. Okay, this the green signals are to show that it is indeed chromosome 11. Now this is a patient with oral squamous cell carcinoma. Here again, the green probes have shown that these chromosomes are indeed chromosome 11, but you see that there is abnormal gene expression or abnormal cyclin D1 expression in the oral squamous cell carcinoma. That is where you get the red signals. So in this, you see normal cell shows 2 red signals for cyclin D1 gene and 2 green signals for chromosome 11. In Pic 2, what we see here is an abnormal oral squamous cell carcinoma cell showing 3 or more red signals. Okay. Now this was a study done by done in an Indian institution only. Again, fish can be fish is basically used more than tissues. It is used to identify chromosomal abnormalities. Okay, so this again is another example. It can easily detect deletions. This is a normal DNA sequence. Okay, now when we put a probe against that normal DNA sequence, the probe will come and bind. On the other hand, if there is a deletion, now here what happens is the same DNA sequence, but you have 2 to 3 nucleotides which are missing or deleted from this part of the DNA. So the probe will not come and bind, and hence there will be no fluorescence, and hence you can understand that there is a mutation in that particular DNA. It is a deletion mutation. Okay, so fish is generally used in order to identify chromosomal abnormalities, whereas the CISH or the chromogenic in situ hybridization is used in order to locate or identify to which part of the cell the probe will go and bind, and to which part of the cell an abnormal DNA or RNA is present. Now, this is an extension of FISH. It is called as multicolor FISH or spectral karyotyping. Now, spectral karyotyping is you use 5 fluorochromes. Okay, and this is what it looks like after all the chromosomes in our body are there. We have 22 autosomal chromosomes and 1 X or Y chromosome. So this is how it will look after you stain it with or after you hybridize it with a fluorescent probe. Okay. Now, after this coloring is done using computer technology, what is done is using a particular software according to the length of the autosomal genes. It is all arranged from 1 to 22, and finally the X and Y chromosome. Okay. Based on the length, the lengthiest one is generally made one, and the 22nd one is shortest. This is a spectral karyotype. Okay, this is called a spectral karyotyping. It helps in order to identify whether all the genes are present or not. I mean, all the chromosomes are present or not, and if there is any translocation between chromosomes. Now, if one part of the two goes and binds to one, or it is translocated to one, it will show up. For example, here. See, this is an example here. Now, this is translocation. This is chromosome 1, whereas this is chromosome 11. Now, what happens is a part of the chromosome 11 is translocated to chromosome 1, and a part of the chromosome 1 is translocated to chromosome 11. So, this is called as, now this is a translocation chromosomal aberration. These are easily picked up by spectral karyotyping. Deletions and all are difficult to pick up, but when translocations happen, addition, deletion are difficult, but translocations happen because of the difference in the chromosomal colors. It easily shows up on spectral karyotyping. Should I go slower? Okay. Now, applications in pathology, where fluorescent in situ hybridization and in situ hybridization, chromogenic in situ hybridization is used. One, as I said, in tissue sections, you can find out the location of the viral particles. Okay, for example, EBV in oral hairy leukoplakia, or HPV, into which strata of the epithelium it is present in oral premalignant and malignant lesions, or as we just saw, where to which part of the lung tissue or the respiratory epithelial tissue the SARS-CoV-2 virus is going and binding to. All these can be done in tissue section. So this is important thing. The tissue architecture is preserved here, and you can identify where in the tissue it is going and binding. Then the FISH, or the fluorescent in situ hybridization, is used in order to find out numerical and structural chromosomal abnormality. With the spectral karyotyping, you can find out any extra or deleted chromosomes. You can find out translocations, etc. Yeah. Next is advantages. It is a rapid technique. It is easily understood by pathologists. A large number of cells can be. It is a rapid test. A large number of cells can be used. Then efficiency is usually very high. Sensitivity, specificity is high, and again it is more as like other molecular techniques. This is also an automated test. Restriction is, again, as with PCR, with FISH also, only when we know the DNA sequence of the target DNA or RNA can we do FISH. Okay. Now, when we do not know, we have to do genetic sequencing. That is all research there is. I'm not even going into it, but that is what you use next generation sequencing and all in order to sequence when a novel virus comes, or when a new DNA or RNA has to be sequenced. In such cases, you cannot use your PCR, you cannot use your FISH, nothing. In such cases, you have to go for sequencing techniques, or comparative genomics or microarray will come in next. Okay. Then only a few abnormalities can be assessed simultaneously. Then another important thing is you require a fluorescence microscope. Finally, coming to microarrays. And this is again another application of molecular techniques. So molecular techniques, the basic principle is you have a DNA sequence or RNA sequence, and to that a probe comes and binds. The same thing is again used in microarray. Microarrays are otherwise called as lab on a chip. Okay. Now you have a glass slide or a nylon membrane, onto which you see the small rectangle. I mean small dots here. These are like thousands and thousands. I mean, you can have like thousands of either DNA or tissue or RNA. Anything can be immobilized, and a probe can be a probe or tissue sample. Either you can attach the probe. Usually probes are attached here. Okay, you can attach the probes here, and you can put the test sample. In which case it is called as a DNA microarray. The reverse can also be done. You can attach tissue samples from different patients, or you can attach tissue samples from different tumors and or different segments of the tumor DNA sequence, And again, with probes, you can identify which part, to which area the probe is going and binding. So this is how, after binding, the slide will look like under the fluorescent microscope. So microarrays are small rectangles of glass or nylon membrane to which thousands of high density DNA or protein probes are arranged in a regular grid pattern. There are three types of microarrays. One is one is tissue microarrays, wherein you are attaching the tissues or you are immobilizing thousands of tissue segments, and you're going to and you're pouring the probe over it. Or you have protein microarrays where proteins are immobilized and the test sample is poured over it. Or else finally you have, this is the most common, this is called as a DNA chip or DNA microarrays. Now DNA chip or DNA microarrays, the DNA segments are immobilized. Now, like, this can be used in order to identify gene expression also. Like for example, now here we have a normal tissue. Okay, now we are going to extract DNA from it. Now here you have a tumor tissue, and we are going to extract. We are going to learn gene expression. So to learn gene expression, you can't test for DNA. We generally test for the mRNAs. Okay. So the mRNA is isolated, and then what you do is the tumor tissue is labeled with a red fluorescent dye, whereas a normal tissue is labeled with a green fluorescent dye, okay, or fluorescent probes. Now then what happens is the DNA from the RNA, the DNA from the tumor tissue and from the normal tissue, they are, now this is a DNA chip. Okay, on that various probes are attached or DNA segments are attached. Now what you do is you are going to put both the tumor tissue as well as the normal tissue onto the DNA chip, and this is something, you get something like this. Okay, when you get yellow, okay, when you get yellow, it means that equal amounts of DNA from the normal tissue as equal amounts of DNA from the normal tissue as well as the tumor tissue are expressed, or you can interpret it as the gene expression in this particular location. The gene expression is of the tumor tissue is equivalent or equal to the normal tissue, that particular gene expression. Now, if it is red, okay, if it is red, it shows that that particular DNA is expressed more, or that particular gene is expressed more in the tumor tissue as compared to normal tissue. Now, when you see more of green here, when you see more of green, it doesn't mean that the normal tissue is expressing it more. On the other hand, it means that the tumor tissue is not expressing that particular gene to the level that it should be expressed, or it is down-regulated. That particular, now this particular gene is, this particular gene is down-regulated, this particular gene is up-regulated, and here it is normally expressed. So this is how you can study the on a microRNA. You can study like thousands of genetic sequences at one go. Again, problem is it is very expensive, and another thing is you need very sophisticated software for this. This is how it will look. We have green areas, lighter green areas, lighter yellow areas, red areas. Yep. This is just another same thing. We have cancer cells, normal cells. It is red. This is green, and we hybridized, and you get something like this. Now, microarray. The problem with microarray is a good thing about microarray. That most important advantage is multiple gene expressions can be, or multiple genes can be studied at one go. The limitation is the cost, and also expertise is required, and you need very good softwares. Okay, so that is one thing. Now, some of the areas where microarray has been used to study oral diseases is oral squamous cell carcinoma. Oral squamous cell carcinoma, it is shown that at least 46 upregulated genes and 32 downregulated genes have been found in oral squamous cell carcinoma. And there was also a difference in gene expression between premalignant conditions as compared to oral squamous cell carcinoma. And again, a difference in gene expression was found between metastasizing squamous cell carcinoma as opposed to non-metastasizing tumors of the oral cavity. Okay, with high metastatic potential, low metastatic potential. So these are some of the applications of microarrays. So with that we come to the end of molecular techniques. All the high funda stuff is over. Now we can go back to, I put this molecular techniques should actually come after immunologic techniques, but I put the molecular techniques first, thinking that the initial part, attention span is better. Now it is like we can go on to the lighter immunologic diagnostic techniques. So just to summarize molecular techniques, you have started with the advent of blotting techniques, southern blotting, northern blotting, western blotting, but then it went on to it was not very popular, at least at a clinical level it was not popular at all. Then it was turned to PCR tests. PCR tests became extremely popular. It has come to be used in most it has very good clinical applications. And okay. Immunological techniques, okay, then we'll just skip the summarizing part. I'll likely directly go on to immunological techniques. Immunological techniques, as I told you, it is based on antigen antibody reaction. Now, antigen is a protein, can be a protein, a carbohydrate, or a lipid molecule, which has a tendency, which has got the ability to elicit an antibody or immune response from the host. Okay, antibody is what the host produces by the plasma cells. It is generally IgA, D, E, G, and M. So generally IgM is produced first. IgM is produced first, followed by IgG. The antigen can directly go and bind to the antibody here. Now, precipitation and agglutination tests. Now, these tests have been around for a long time. Okay, and these are still popular. It was like from 1800s onwards, precipitation and agglutination tests started coming into use. Early part of 19th century, it started growing, and then later part of 19th century, the immunoassays came into play. Now, precipitation reaction. The precipitation reaction, you have a soluble antigen and a soluble antibody. You see a visible precipitate being formed when the antigen and antibody combine. Now, either you're going to put either the antigen is the test and antibody is put from outside, or else the antibody is the test and antigen can be put from outside. So, in the end, a lattice formation occurs. Here you see two solutions. These are both are soluble. Two solutions in the center, you get a precipitation band. Then you have the immunodiffusion. This is a test sample or test antigen. You have antibodies incorporated by diffusion. You get precipitation reaction here. Electrophoresis, as we had seen in blotting, again it is electrophoresis and electric gel, and then you get the arcs here. Okay, this is called as immunodiffusion technique in precipitation. But precipitation reactions are not specific at all. It is not commonly used nowadays, except it is not commonly used nowadays at all. Now, next is agglutination reaction. In agglutination, it is one step ahead. The agglutination reaction also, differences here, the antigen is usually a particulate or it is insoluble, and then to that we add an antibody. And again, you can see a visible agglutination or clumping. Agglutination reactions are commonly used even now. Okay, now here what happens is particulate, the whole bacterial cell, to that antibodies come and bind. And these bacterial cells and antibodies together, they form a visible clumping. Okay, they forms a visible clumping. Now this, for example, this is a suspension. You see the clumping here. Okay, dot clumping. Now this is visible to the naked eye. Passive agglutination, when the passive agglutination is used when the antigen is very small, and the reaction cannot happen unless you attach it to an external. This thing, like it can be the carrier particle, it can be a bead. That is our bead agglutination test, lattice agglutination test. You have many agglutination tests, and finally, again, this also forms a agglutination product or a lattice formation. This also can be seen by the visible eye. These agglutination reactions are still even now widely used in laboratories for serological testing. Blood typing, ABO blood typing. All of us would have done that in our physiology labs at some point. The ABO blood typing depends on agglutination. Widal test for typhoid, hepatitis, surface antigens, rheumatoid factor. These are not now usually done with the agglutination. You use immunological, other more radio immunoassays. The next is immunoassays. Immunoassays is, here the difference is the antigen or antibody, it is not a whole bacterial cell or it is not a whole viral antigen. So you get very low concentration of the antigen and antibody, and antigen will bind to the antibody, but that reaction is not visible to the naked eye. So in order to make it visible to the naked eye, what you do is you add a tag or label to it. Okay, a tag or label is attached to the antigen or antibody, and you do not see the antigen antibody reaction as such. You just see the you just see the label which is activated. Of this radioimmunoassay was first invented, but then like your other radio probes, this also is not commonly used now because of the problems associated with radioisotopes. Enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay or ELISA test is extremely popular test, and it has got a wide variety of applications. And then you also have the immunofluorescence test where the fluorescent label is attached. I'll just go through the ELISA test alone. Okay. ELISA test, they generally put the samples in microwells like this, and you can either on the microwell will have an adsorbed antigen or antibody. If you're going to test for adsorbed antigen or antibody, the antigen antibody reaction happens. The enzyme or the enzyme will give a color reaction. Okay, the enzyme will give a color reaction when the whole reaction happens. Now we have direct, indirect, and sandwich ELISA. Direct ELISA is not commonly used. It is very specific, but it is not commonly used because you have the antigen. From the test sample, we are going to test the antigen, and to that the antibody is added along with the chromogen, so it will give a color reaction. Indirect ELISA. This is used for antibody detection. Now, in most of the blood tests, we are going to test for either the IgM or IgG or the antibody. Okay, so here antigen is adsorbed onto the surface, antibody reacts. This is a test antibody. This is a test antibody, and then a second antibody is added onto it. A sandwich ELISA, this is in order to again test for the antigen here. Generally, target antigen is present, and you have 2 antibodies for various purposes. So basically, you're going to test for antigen. The sandwich ELISA is sandwich ELISA and direct ELISA both test antigens, but sandwich ELISA shows a much more. It is much more sensitive, okay? And you can see the reaction much more in a much better fashion in sandwich ELISA. And then finally, you have this is an offshoot from all the ELISA tests. It is called as lateral flow assay. It is called as immunochromatographic test. Okay, you have strip test or card test, wherein you give the test sample, you put the test sample to one end of the card or strip, and then it will start diffusing. By capillary flow, it will start diffusing. It will pick up antibodies, and then the test line antigen antibody. This is the test antibody. The antigen antibody reaction will happen, and you can see a positive result. The prototype of which, the most commonly used of this, is the pregnancy test, okay, in which you test the human chorionic hormone. Applications of ELISA is wide. Okay, it is used. It has got multiple uses, of which first and foremost it is used in infections. And whenever even as dental surgeons, you ask for an HIV test or an HPS-AG test before surgical procedures. The test that is done is ELISA. Okay, so you can test for the ELISA of the HIV, hepatitis, SARS-CoV-2, everything. Okay, it can show recent infection. If it is IgM shows up, it shows that the infection is recent. If IgG shows up, then it is a past infection. It is used for blood donation, etc. And again, antigens of infectious agents also can be tested. Next is tumor markers. Now, this test is also very commonly done now in cancer patients, or if cancer suspected patients, you do a PSA, CEA, PSA. These are also very specific nowadays. Okay, even in the absence of a positive biopsy result, also if the tumor markers are sufficiently high, an occult tumor is generally diagnosed. Now, hormone tests, most of the hormone tests like thyroid tests, luteinizing hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, testosterone, all these are also tested by ELISA. Drug abuse also, cocaine, amphetamine. In drug abuse also, the drugs act as antigens, and antibodies against that are given, and you can test for the drug abuse. Now, finally, with that we come to the end of all the immunologic and molecular tests. This is just a roundup of the various COVID-19 tests. Okay. Now, just to reiterate, this is a COVID-19 virus. It is an RNA virus. It is enveloped, and these are some of the areas which are tested in COVID testing. The spike protein in antigen antibody testing, the spike protein, M protein, E protein, etc. And if it is a molecular test like PCR, then usually the ORF1 gene or the E gene or N gene. These are the segments of the DNA, segments of the RNA that is tested by PCR. Now, the various tests available are, first and foremost, real-time PCR. You get a nasopharyngeal, or you get a swab, you put it in the lysa buffer, and RT-PCR. If required, a quantitative is also done. So the RT-PCR test is done, and samples can be commonly a naso-oropharyngeal swab is done. Now, in patients who have sputum, throat swabs are positive in a week, 1 or 2 weeks it is positive, but after that they do not show positivity generally. Sputum can also be taken if the patient has cough symptoms. Deep airway material, if the patient is already in an ICU and it is easier to take the airway material, or you can take deep from the lung, that is always better. And finally, of interest to us is saliva. Saliva is also used now. It has been approved by FDA and all. It is called the spit test. Now, the good thing about saliva is it reduces it can be. It is much easier to collect saliva sample. You don't need a trained personnel. So in that way, the healthcare workers are at much lower risk when saliva is used. It can be also used from at home, and the saliva sample can be sent to the lab, and the test results have been promising. So saliva is an upcoming or important material in order to test for RT-PCR. Okay. Then you have the rapid. Now this is the gold standard of SARS-CoV-2 test now. Then you have the rapid antigen test. Rapid antigen test is what it is. Your ID test. It is a card test, or you can use ELISA test also for that. But the problem with antigen test is it is again the sample is a naso or oropharyngeal swab. The problem is it is very specific but not very sensitive. This is FDA guideline. Antigen test is very specific, which means if you test positive for it, you can be almost sure that you have the disease. Whereas if you test negative for it, it is not very sensitive. So the thing is, if you test negative for it, you cannot rule out infection. So you might have to go ahead and do a PCR test in order to confirm. So this is the FDA guideline. Antigen tests are very specific for virus, but they are not very sensitive as molecular PCR tests. This means that positive results from antigen tests are highly accurate, but there is a high chance that false negatives are present. So negative tests cannot rule out infection. With this in mind, negative results from an antigen test will have to be confirmed with a PCR test. So that is a rapid antigen test. Then there is a antibody test. Antibody test also, it is available in both the card form as well as in the regular ELISA format. Now, when you do an antibody test, you can get positivity for IgM. If it is positive, and if it is positive for IgM, it means that the person has recent infection or an ongoing infection. If it is positive for both IgM and IgG, again, the most probably the infection has progressed beyond 1 or 2 weeks. Okay, that is when both IgM and IgG starts showing positivity. That is, IgM has not totally disappeared, whereas IgG has started appearing. And if it is positive for only IgM, it shows a past infection. That is rapid antibody test. With that, we come to the end of the presentation. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shani Bashir, for that overwhelming insight into the advanced laboratory diagnostic techniques and making this topic equally interesting with such elaborate pictorial representations. I now call upon the.
And I have to thank you all actually.
I now call upon the moderator, Dr. Nadeem, and panelist, Dr. Salman Siddiq, to take over the question and answer session. I request both of you to start your videos as well, please. Dr. Salman?
Yes.
Can you switch on your video, please?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, thank you. Please, you guys can continue.
Wow, that was too damn good, Dr. Shaini. Mashallah. I think genetics and all these testings are the most hated for me in person. I mean to say, I never liked the subject per se. And
This is
after hearing
amazing.
this, I think probably I think we need a one-on-one session to understand more what are these tests.
You
Thank you
mean
for
you did
the
not understand?
no in depth. I'm saying in depth. It was so amazing. It was so amazing. Probably you can sit one-on-one and you can hear you again.
Okay.
And thank you. It was really fantastic. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Salman.
Wa
Welcome
alaikum
aboard.
salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Welcome aboard, brother. How are you doing?
Good, good. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Thank you, Dr. Shaini. It was almost, say, around 6-7 years. Thank you for refreshing the advanced diagnostic techniques. I remember reading this during my PG exam. After that, we have never touched this again.
Correct. Actually, it is true. It is just that I was in academics, so I was in touch with a little longer.
Yes, yes. And there are two very good articles which I would like to share for GDP. It's, I think, Regesi and Jordan, Advanced Diagnostic Techniques, Part 1 and Part 2, which will be very helpful in understanding the basic. So I think Dr.
That would be
Nadeem,
great. Yeah, when you post it on GDP, that would be great. I think we can correlate with her talk, and we can. I think the
yes,
understand.
exactly.
Yeah,
But it
and
is
I
a
think we
very,
can.
very, very big article. I think both the Part 1 and Part 2 will have around 35-40 pages. So you'll have all the advanced diagnostic techniques in that. It is actually good for refreshing. And I think we
That's
used
great.
to follow our textbook, which is John D. Bancroft, most of the times, which we used to see in this. So, I mean, I think it's better we can start with the questions or taking up the questions.
Yeah, the only John T I knew was from South Africa, who was a good fielder.
No,
Right, fine.
this is John D. Bancroft.
No, that's what I said. The only John T I knew was John T
Okay.
Rhodes from South Africa.
Okay.
Okay, right. Coming back to the questions, I think a lot of questions, beautiful questions, and most of them are from Dr. Gausia. I'm going to read out the questions in not in the exact manner. I'm going to random pick, correlate the questions as a chain, and group them together. The question comes from her. She asks, what are the advantages or disadvantages of blood-based or saliva-based tests? Please guide.
Yes,
Salman?
Dr. Shaini, you can take over.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, blood is the standard, and saliva also contains the same analytes or most of the analytes as in blood, because by transfusion, I mean by transcellular movement, most of the analytes come into saliva. But it has shown promise in a lot of areas. Like for example, viral testing, it has been shown that cytomegalovirus tests much better in saliva as compared to blood. Whereas if you test for antigens and antibodies, that is much better in blood. So saliva can be used if it shows at least what if it shows even if not equally good, if it shows comparable results also, we will prefer to use saliva. That is because it is a non-invasive procedure. It is much easier to collect. So saliva is, as a diagnostic aid, is being researched very much now. And
Right. Dr. Salman, any exclusive diagnostic tests only for blood or saliva? Yeah.
So basically, what I would want to add here is they're specific. Basically, it depends on what kind of tests we are doing. If it is an antigen antibody test, then we can think of blood. If it is, for example, if you're going to do molecular based test, then possibly saliva can also be helpful. And especially in, as Dr. Shaini told, for viral particles, saliva is supposed to be the best, source of doing a test. And the other thing is handling or, storing. The blood is slightly more cumbersome than saliva. Collecting saliva is much easier than collecting blood.
And it does not coagulate.
Yeah, it does not coagulate. And major disadvantage with blood is it tends to coagulate. So the handling is, it has to be much careful, and probably drug abuse has shown a promising effect in diagnostic. I mean, saliva has shown a very promising effect in drug abuse cases. So most of the times saliva is much, a better source for getting a result for drug abuse cases. And
Okay,
especially,
Sarwan, just to continue with your answer, can you just give an example and you can continue, yeah? So that would be easy, like a sofa for me, like a
Okay.
novice person like me can easily understand. Just give an example so that we can just proceed with it.
Dr. Shaini
Cocaine
can think of an example.
Cocaine testing, amphetamine
Yes.
testing,
Yes.
all these show up in saliva also. And as I said, saliva, even if it shows, even if it is not up to the mark as blood also, even if it shows good testing in saliva, we prefer saliva. Cocaine
Okay,
testing and cannabis testing, all these are done in saliva, salivary samples.
Okay.
To
Again,
simplify
COVID
much,
also. See, SARS-CoV-2 also,
yeah.
preferably if more tests are done and SARS-CoV-2 can be isolated, can be identified in saliva. Saliva is a preferred medium because, as I said, it can be done by the patient. The entire PPE thing is like you can do without the PPE thing for swab collection. And nasopharyngeal swab and oropharyngeal swab are very difficult procedures for the patient. Also, it is
Painful in the sense.
brain numbing procedure.
Yes.
So any day, if you can collect saliva and do it, better.
Also, if I can add, actually, now these days, there's one researcher from Saudi Arabia who's been granted a lot of funding. He's planning to detect COVID virus and using a breath analyzer, just like alcohol detection.
Oh, wow, that's great.
I don't know how exactly they're going to do it, but then this was very much in the news a couple of weeks back in Saudi Arabia. He is one of the students from King Saud University, a researcher on grants and a scholarship studying in University of Michigan or California. He was presently in collaboration with one of the leading scientists there, who was actually working on a breath analyzer there for the difficult other, I don't know for what, endocrine or metabolic disorders. And then because of this present COVID scenario, they included the COVID also. And I don't know what is the present status of it. But then the latest update was they were trying to actually identify and isolate the virus particles in the breath. I don't know how exactly they're doing it, but then this is the latest news.
Actually, that would be that would be boon to the medical fraternity, yeah, rather than going into the laborious way of testing and people standing in queues for those nasopharynx testing, right, for the COVID.
I think it's still in the budding stages. It's too early to say anything. Yeah.
There is an FDA approved spit test in America and all. You can just, into a medium, they send the medium to your house. You can spit into that medium and then just seal it properly and send it back to the lab. At the lab, the testing happens in the lab, but the sampling happens at home.
Okay, that's nice. That's nice. Okay, continuing with the same question. Yeah, just continue with the same question. Since you mentioned so many tests in your talk, which test will help as a biomarker for periodontitis or dental caries in blood or saliva? Are there any specific tests you would recommend?
All these tests are used, but basically PCR is used.
Yes,
PCR is generally used because that's what PCR test. The thing about PCR test, as I said, you can from even small amounts you can pick up. Okay, from subgingival crevices and all, you can pick up and do it. And PCR tests are generally used because these tests are validated over a long years. These tests are very well validated. So if you're looking for a specific organism or a set of organisms, PCR. But if you want to see which pathogens, if you want to find out new pathogens, you would have to do sequencing or microarray tests.
Biomarkers are basically this is what we deal with genomics and proteomics. So this is something to detect something specific. Like for example, we have specific biomarkers for certain diseases, like for squamous cell carcinoma, lichen planus, and many other oral diseases. We have biomarkers. So probably, I think PCR would be the best one for detecting biomarkers.
So continuing the same question, yeah. So how long do we have in case of saliva for preserving their biomarkers? Is there any specific time?
Specific
period,
time,
duration?
you mean?
Yeah.
No, it depends on the temperature. Basically, if the temperature, say it is, usually we preserve saliva in room temperature. Neither not very cold or not very hot. So it depends on the temperature. Basically, I think you can preserve it for weeks together, if I'm not wrong.
And another thing is viruses, they do not even require a medium to be stored. You can
Yes.
take the sample and you can actually send it over. Viruses are not, I mean, the medium is not going to help much in preserving the viruses as long as you have a little bit of isotonic and even a little bit of hypertonicity is also okay with viruses. Whereas if it is bacterial specimens, you need a particular, the medium is very
Yeah,
important.
medium is, and
I think
the
this
same.
is due to the robust cell structure, the viral, cellular.
No, the virus is as such, it is like that gray area between living and non-living. So the virion
Non-living, yeah.
particles, as such, it is, you can almost consider it as non-living. So whether you put it on any surface, the virion particles will survive. And
Does it-
the moment
does-
the virion, it enters or it gets access to a viable cell, it starts multiplying. So the thing is, when you're transporting it, even if that viral coat, everything goes off, you have the basic viral DNA or viral RNA in the after being transported also, you can do your molecular tests.
I think this is the basis of the viral spores, being active for a very long time.
Longer period of time. Yes,
yeah.
viruses are.
In terms of
Yeah.
sterilization and disinfection, the virus is
Yes,
difficult to disinfect and then sterilize.
it is difficult to kill the virus,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah.
So that is, as you told, as you have used the word robust, it is, it is a specific word which can be used. So even in case when we correlate the same question in case of COVID, when the samples are taken, sometimes it so happens when we don't have a medium also, we can actually preserve these samples for at least 24 hours or more than that probably without a virus transporting medium. And I think, if I'm not wrong, I'm not very much sure about this, but it is approximately around 56 degrees centigrade temperature where the virus starts degrading. If it goes beyond 56 degrees centigrade, so the virus starts degrading most of the times.
Dr. Nadeem?
Your mic is muted, Dr. Nadeem. You have to unmute.
Yeah. No, I think it was from the host. He had muted me. I think I was talking too much. Right. I
My
think.
bad. I'm sorry.
Okay. Coming to the next question. Just 1 minute, please. Okay. This is from Dr. Firdaus itself. Are there any methods to map the gene on the chromosomal level?
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
FISH, fluorescent in situ hybridization is it is the best test for gene mapping on chromosomes. And it is done in different times. That is at the time of, interphase, metaphase, the different phases of chromosomes. So this is what we can do. FISH can be used.
Great,
And also
great,
there
great.
is something called as, I did not put it in the slide, there is something called as next generation sequencing.
Sequencing,
So
yes.
that when you have a novel tumor cell or a novel virus or bacteria, when you don't know, see, as when I was talking about PCR, FISH, etc., I kept on mentioning that in order to do these tests, you need to have a known probe. Okay, but when you do not have a known probe, when the virus is new, or like even SARS-CoV-2, when the virus is new, you need to do what is called as next generation
Sequencing.
sequencing. There is Sanger sequencing, etc., wherein each and every nucleotide is put base by base. It is sequenced on the template RNA or DNA, and you
Right.
make up the entire genome. In fact, the whole human DNA has been sequenced and kept. There are like some 30 billion DNA sequences. Nucleotide sequences in that human genome.
Okay. Okay. Now coming back to the accuracy. Now, as a pathologist, which test is more accurate? Saliva based or blood based?
It depends on what you're trying to test for. Like again, we told if it is an antigen antibody, then obviously blood is the best one.
Okay. So it is case specific
Yeah,
for.
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
More than accuracy, the words to be used would be sensitivity, specificity.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which test would be more sensitive
Correct.
and which test would be more specific.
I think that these two words are to be, we have to engrave. Yeah, we have to engrave ourselves. Yeah, that's nice. Okay.
Actually,
And
there
which
is
is the most?
if you want to, there is a mnemonic for that. It is something like spin. If it is specific, then you can rule in the disease. And spout If it, I mean, snout, if it is sensitive, then you can, snout is, you can, you can rule out the disease.
That's what I said. We need, we need one-on-one tuition for this. We're learning those mnemonic.
When it is confirmatory or it is not confirmatory.
No, the easiest way to remember, no, the way I remember it is, easiest way is a highly specific test. As the word meaning says, specific. It is specific for that test. So if you get a positive result with that, it is the probability that you have the disease is very high.
Very high.
Okay.
Okay.
Sensitive
So I
test.
think, the next question. Yeah, the next question is from Dr. Ali Mubarak. He asks, what is the most accurate? Now I'm going to scratch out that accurate, and I will ask you, what is the most specific test for SARS-CoV-2?
PCR is
real-time PCR. Real-time RT-PCR with mixed or multiplexed also.
See, basically, Dr. Shaini has explained it in a very well manner, but I'll just tell you, it is just a PCR is not something which is very, but it looks like as if it is something great. PCR just, if I have to compare it, is just like a Xerox machine, wherein you have to just need a photocopy of something. In Xerox machine, we need to give a paper for photocopy. In PCR, we don't give a paper for photocopy. So it amplifies. Millions, billions of DNAs are amplified within cycles. So usually 40 cycles are what is, kept as a standard. So per cycle, the time is fixed, say for 15 minutes or 10 minutes, or depending upon what is required. So Dr. Shaini has put a very beautiful picture in her presentation, wherein there are some slides wherein a fluorescent light is getting emitted, and there are two lenses like this. And when the light is emitted, and these are getting captured by the camera. So what is this camera doing? This camera, with the help of a software, it is whatever light is emitted by that, it is converting it in the form of a graph. Now this graph is giving us whether it is positive or negative, depending on the amount of cycle.
That is what, since it is automated, our work is so much less.
It is nothing, but to understand, it is like to positive or negative. If the graph is much higher, then it is positive. If the graph is much lower, then we say it is negative. So this is how the result is analyzed. The only thing what we are supposed to be doing is, as soon as we send the sample, there are multiple steps which are used. Basically, she has also told it, lysis is done, then buffer is added, then the other fragments except for the RNA is removed, cleared off, and then further it is loaded onto a PCR machine. And the advantage with the PCR machine, I think around 96 samples can be run at once. So we can use 96 samples together, and different graphs of each 96 samples will be plotted onto the system or on the computer. So at a time, we can do around 96 tests. For example, say in 6 hours, if you have one PCR machine, we are doing 96 tests in that.
That's great. Okay, before you do that, how do you handle, preservation and time limit storage before sending?
So that is what I
exactly
told.
Do you do?
Virus is, it is a robust structure basically. So as soon as we take a swab, a nasopharyngeal swab or a oropharyngeal swab, we have a tube. So we put the swab into that tube. So that tube consists of some, transporting media. So when it is gone to the transporting media, again, the temperature, as I told you, if it goes beyond 56 degrees, then there is degradation. Or if there is some manipulation in that transporting media, there are possibly degradation of that. So once this is sent to the lab, they start processing this. So they lyse the cell first, they extract the DNA, RNA from that. Now, why we are doing RT-PCR is to be more simple, reverse transcription. That is, RNA is getting converted into DNA. And it is not the RNA what is being extracted from the sample is being tested in the PCR machine, but it is converted into a DNA, and that is what is getting tested in the PCR machine.
Also, one of the reasons to manage the temperature change is to have a gel medium instead of a liquid medium.
Yes.
Right. And the one more thing was, Dr. Gausia also asks, I think this is already answered by you, the compliance for the patient and the clinician in handling saliva and the blood. You said, blood is anytime better. I think saliva was
saliva
anytime
is
better.
Saliva is
Yeah, saliva
anytime
was anytime better. What in cases of special needs pediatric patients? Yeah.
Special need pediatric patients, it is much easier to take saliva
Saliva.
most of the times.
Okay, right, fine. The next question is from Dr. Iftikhar. Is paternity test DNA or RNA test?
It is a
DNA
DNA test.
It is called as DNA fingerprint, DNA testing or DNA fingerprint.
To confirm whether the parent of individual, he himself is the parent or somebody else is the parent.
Right. He
In that
continues to
example, I
ask
showed you
which is the
also-
best method of.
Huh.
Yeah,
In that
tell me.
example-
You're telling me something, Shiny. Sorry to interrupt.
No.
You're
In
telling
that
something?
example, I showed you also, see the mother's DNA and the child's DNA is compared to the parent, the suspected father's DNA. So
Yeah.
how many the level to which the bands are matching, it is based on that the paternity tests are decided.
Right.
This is not only with the paternity test. Nowadays, a lot of forensic testings have been doing. To detect the crimes and all those things. So we use a lot of DNA tests for that.
Right. And what is the best method of differentiating between benign and malignant tumors?
See, when we are talking about benign and malignant, I will not go to any of the molecular techniques or any antigen antibody techniques. The best thing is histopathology to see whether it is benign or malignant. Based on the cellular structure. If it is malignant, the architecture and the cellular structures are completely different. So when we are talking about benign and malignant, one thing is the clinical presentation of the lesion, depending upon the duration, site, history. So that is the reason whenever there is any picture popped up in the GDP group, the first question I ask them, give me some history. Because without history, it is very, very, very difficult to comment on anything. So in case of differentiating between benign and malignant, histopathology would remain the gold standard.
Yeah, sometimes we have, OPGs popping up and asking what is the diagnosis.
Yes.
So it's difficult. What exactly we are looking? Are we looking at the teeth or the heart tissues there? Fine.
Recently also, I think we had a case from Dr. Umar Sharif. I was actually waiting for what was the histopathological report. He had excised.
We are all waiting for that actually.
Yeah.
We are all waiting. Dr. Iftikhar continues to ask, what is alpha fetoprotein?
Alpha fetoprotein is basically found in the livers of the newborn. It acts as a tumor marker basically.
Right.
And as the newborn grows older, the levels of that comes down. Maybe at the age of 1 year, the levels come down. It should come down.
But
and in case of some tumors or in case of some other pathologies, this AFP increases. The levels of the AFP increases. So that is how it acts as a tumor marker.
Dr. Firdaus asks some note on fish and CISH. I think this is already explained nicely by Dr. Shiny.
Fish
is basically
fish. He has put it as PISH. I think it is a typo error. It should be
fluorescent in situ hybridization. PISH is plate in situ hybridization.
Oh, okay. Then I'm wrong. My bad. I'm wrong. I thought it was CISH. Okay. What is PISH?
Plate in situ hybridization is used to differentiate or different mutations in same genes. That is basically to detect phenotypic heterogeneity.
Can you just cut that into very normal, simple terms to understand?
In situ hybridization, PISH is used to identify in which area of the tissue the gene is expressed.
Okay.
If it is in the epithelium, whether it is in the connective tissue, the upper layers of the epithelium, the lower layers of the epithelium, or if it is in a chromosome, which part of the chromosome?
Which part of the chromosome?
I think
the arms of the chromosome or the telomeres, or which parts of that?
Which part? So basically,
most of the oncologists they swear by the FISH test actually when it comes to testing for breast cancers or leukemias or any kind of blood disorders. I think
that is easier. That is easier for them. They don't have to break their head too much on that. They'll just send the samples and they'll wait for the report.
And FISH, the thing is, they usually combine it with flow cytometry. It is very common. Yeah. See, some leukemias and all on the blood smear only you can make out it is this leukemia, depending on the morphology. But there are, and some cases you can say, no, this is non-malignant. But in every borderline case, they say we'll flow it. That is, they use flow cytometry to identify chromosomal aberrations and the in the
which
test
area
sample.
of the chromosome basically the defect is. So that is what we tend to
It is used
see.
very much in leukemias.
Yes, leukemias. And in the other way around, the other
Apart from
I think
leukemias, I have seen FISH test is widely used in breast carcinomas. They try to differentiate the extra gene, that is the HER2 gene.
HER2 gene,
And,
yes.
yeah, HER2 gene, and that's one of the most they pick out that and these tests don't come out cheap. They are quite costly. I think it
Very
costs more.
expensive. That
Very
is very
expensive.
expensive actually. But not all the places do have these facilities, except if it is an authorized oncology center, or else they'll have to send it to some authorized labs. And the work of an oncologist becomes much easier with these tests.
No, it's very easy for them to write. Go with the FISH test, go with the FISH test, and everything.
Yeah, that is what he just writes it. And
the thing is, with the FISH test, you are able to identify which gene is being expressed here, if it is a HER2 new gene, or which proteins are being expressed. And based on that, it is not just for diagnosis. For therapy also, you give you give a specific therapy. Okay, it is called as what is it called, Salman sir? It is called as targeted therapy. Okay, you can give targeted therapy for that specific carcinoma.
Gene target therapy.
Targeted therapy.
I think the targeted therapy is the new funda which is in the
it is routinely
market
done in
now.
the West. It is
Which is in
routinely
the
done in the West. No, it is routinely done in the West.
in the
but not at all
CA
done
industry
in India.
now,
It's
and
No,
it
in
helps
in
the
India,
clinician. I think Western countries, they follow targeted therapy a lot.
They do only that. I think.
Yeah, they
In
rely
India, it
on
is
targeted
almost
therapy.
almost always not done also.
No, the problem with targeted therapy, it is too far expensive. A common man cannot afford targeted therapy. That's the only issue with the common man. So that's the reason they go back, reverse and try to solve in the conventional way of chemotherapy.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think we have one more question from Dr. Firdaus. Are there any methods to map the gene on chrome? I think this is answered. I'm sorry.
That is FISH.
Yeah. This is answered. He asks lateral flow assays in comparison with other lab tests for infectious diseases.
Lateral flow assays, it is ease. Ease is the most attractive thing about it. It is generally a home test or it is a card test. It can be easily done. But the sensitivity, all pathologists swear or all microbiologists swear that the sensitivity is not up to the mark as other ELISA or regular ELISA tests. So card test, it is easy. But except for the pregnancy test is like so sophisticated now and the markers are very easy to get. So it is a HCG shows up very fast. So that is accurate, but the sensitivity specificity compared to other ELISA tests is less. So in most labs, if you do not have the facility for ELISA, they do card tests. But if you do have the facility for ELISA, they prefer to do standard ELISA tests.
Right. And I think just to end with the question and answer session, we have two things. I think one mnemonic has to be shared by Dr. Shaini on the group, and the articles which is promised by Dr. Salman. I think
articles, I would do it right now. Yeah.
Yeah. At your convenience, brother. At your convenience. Yes. And I think this was most valuable information. I think everybody has got, and I have really updated myself. And I would love to hear this, talk again in the coming time. Thanks a lot, Dr. Salman and Dr. Shaini. Jazakallah khair for answering all the questions. Thank you very much. And any questions which is missed out by the concerned doctors on the group can put forward the questions on the group. Jazakallah khair. Back to you, Dr. Firdaus.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Nadeem and Dr. Salman. And we, the team GEDP, would like to appreciate and then thank all the members for patiently participating in today's session. A special thanks to the speaker to have simplified the vast topic on lab advances with respect to the present scenario. And also the, like Dr. Nadeem and Dr. Dr. Salman to have given such an elaborate question and answer discussion. Thank you again. The recording of this session will be uploaded on our official YouTube channel. Do subscribe and click the bell to get instant notification. And then further discussion to be carried out in the group. Open out for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Jazakallahu khair.
Thank you so much.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.